What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Mets Pod. We are live with the first of 3 special episodes tonight, Tuesday, Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on SNY's social platforms and on SNY's YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. I'm joined by my co-host, Joe DeMayo, and our special guest, MLB insider Andy Martino from SNY, who is on site at the MLB Winter Meetings in San Diego. Andy, it did not take long for the Mets to make a massive news. You broke the news that Justin Verlander was signed to a 2-year, $86 million deal, so I will waste no time. How did this all go down as the Mets saw a major hole at the top of their rotation?
Yeah, they sure did in a dramatic fashion, right at the first morning of the meeting. So it's not exactly what we're used to in our many years covering the Mets when, it was Rick Porcello on day 3 or something. So this is a nice treat for Mets fans here at the beginning of the meetings. How it came together, Connor, really the Mets were negotiating and talking on parallel tracks last week or two to Jacob deGrom and to Verlander. They wanted deGrom back because he was their guy, you can't let your guy go. But they really, in their hearts and in their guts, wanted Verlander more because he was just a better fit. He is communicative during the process with the front office and with Steve Cohen, which was a breath of fresh air from Jacob deGrom, who isn't always communicative. He wanted or could only really reasonably ask for 2 or 3 years instead of 5. With the Mets, as you guys I'm sure have seen and know are trying to do is basically bring on some expensive veterans and short-term deals while they try to improve the organization top to bottom farm system and create their own sustainable winner. Same logic behind Scherzer last year. Verlander is that, and he just won the Cy Young, and deGrom hasn't hardly pitched in 2 years. So when deGrom signed with Texas, there was a little bit of disappointment because they were after him. Mets were, of course, but they didn't get him. But really, I talked to Steve Cohen the minutes after they found out on Friday that deGrom was going to the Rangers, and it was, okay, well, anyway, on to the next thing. And you knew that the next thing was going to be Verlander, who they already liked. Verlander spent Saturday doing a lot of homework on the Mets organization, I was told, figuring out if this is really somewhere he wanted to go. Mets felt confident about how that went. And then by last night, Sunday night, they were getting down the road with a deal, and they didn't have one until this morning. About 9:15 Pacific time, left or noon Eastern, is when they got the call from Verlander's camp saying that they had a deal. So those are the cliff notes of how it went down.
What do you think this says to the perception of the Mets in the industry now that we're talking on back-to-back off seasons? They've pulled in guys like Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander competing against the Dodgers specifically, who are certainly one of the most respected organizations in the sport.
Yeah, well, it says, and certainly no surprise, people who know Steve Cohen's worth and his ambition for the team, it just reiterates now. It's not even new anymore, right? He sent a message with the Verlander signing, but now he's going to be the owner with the highest payroll in baseball probably most years. The Dodgers aren't interested in even playing at that level. The Yankees aren't. So that's what people in baseball know now. And they also Cohen also has a good reputation as an owner that wants to win among players. I got a text from another free agent player today basically saying, hey, what do you know about Steve Cohen? I'm not going to say who it is, but it's a guy the Mets are considering. It's like, we hear in the league, he's like, we hear that Cohen's really treats players well, spends on amenities and comforts, and really wants to win. So there's a really good reputation that's starting to set in around the league among players about the Steve Cohen Mets.
As much as this solved a huge hole at the top of the rotation, it's pretty safe to say the Mets still have a hole somewhere in that 3 to 5 spot. Verlander, Scherzer, they got Carrasco back on the option. Peterson and McGill will be in the mix. But Andy, number one, do you expect them to continue to explore that mid to lower tier pitching market? And who are some of the names that you think they'll seriously look at? We've heard so much about Senga, but we know it's a much deeper market than just the Japanese ace.
Yeah, 100%. They will sign another starting pitcher or acquire one via trade. But there are several free agents they're deep into conversations with on that front. It was always going to be sign one of the 3 aces out there, meaning, of course, deGrom, Verlander, Rodon, and also like a mid to back of the rotation guy. Now, Let's see, Jameson Tyone's the guy. They actually tried to sign him before Verlander a couple of days ago, and it didn't close that deal, but they're still in on him. Jose Quintana they've been talking to. Ross Stripling's the name that's come up. Andrew Heaney. I mean, you can look at the list of free agent starters and say, like, they've talked to all those guys. Bassett and Walker, their own free agents they've talked to. Basically, the way that plays out is that up in the suite, I'm sure they've got a whiteboard or a list with, here are the players we value, here's our basic ranking of them, here's what we would pay them. And then when an agent walks in and they kind of match up, whether it's Tyone's agent or Bassett's agent or whoever, that's the guy they sign. And that's kind of how it's going to work probably over the next couple of days. Any minute now they could sign another starting pitcher. It could be tomorrow, the next day, a little after the meetings, but they are on top of that market.
So you mentioned the trade market. What is the word on kind of the quiet market that there is out there? I mean, at most years you have a feel for at least some players that are probably going to get moved. And this year, I only know Sean Murphy, the catcher from the A's. That sounds like he's going to get moved. Obviously, that's not a Mets thing, but what's your feel for the trade market? And is there any chance that the Mets are looking at moving guys like James McCann or maybe even Mark Canha as an attempt to repurpose some money?
Yeah, Joe, they'd love to move McCann. Question is just how much money could you save? Is it worth it? You know, looking at how much money will the team eat? So that's definitely a possibility. There are other kind of distressed assets out there. Josh Donaldson. I don't know if I put Gleyber Torres in that category. He has been a pretty good player up and down, but he's out there available, just generally speaking. And then not relevant to the Mets. But then on the pitching front, Pablo Lopez is out there. A lot of Marlins guys are out there. I think you probably with the Mets run into the same thing that we saw at the trade deadline where they're not comfortable giving much. But Epler's been engaged there. He prefers trades to free agencies, he's said many times. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. It's a little easier to track and report on free agents, frankly, because I can call their agents, figure out, hey, they're meeting with Tyone today or whatever. Trades are a little quieter usually as they're in process, but definitely Epler's been having the conversations.
Andy, we couldn't have you on without asking what's the latest on the two big fish in the outfield, not just Aaron Judge, but also Brandon Nimmo, who, from everything you've said for a while, the Mets would love to have him back. The question is, at what price? And then the bigger question is, if they don't have him back, what the plan would be in center field, of course.
Yeah, there's a sense, I think, that the minimum market is getting a little away from the Mets. Not that they won't sign him, but it's like they knew there'd be a lot of interest. But they already have the highest payroll. Cohen doesn't want to be like public enemy number one among the other owners and have a $350 million payroll. And the next highest is like, two whatever. I don't know offhand, wherever the Yankees are at right now, or the Dodgers are pretty low at the moment, actually. But anyway, they don't want to be these runaway spenders. So it becomes a little tougher to figure where Nimmo fits. But then at the same time, it's tougher to imagine how their offense is all that good without him. They had some inconsistency, of course, in the offense with him. And he's such a tremendous producer at the top of the order. He'd be a really tough guy to lose. He's here at the meetings, meeting with teams. I don't think anything's imminent with the signing with him. We've seen Scott Boras more than willing to be patient with his free agents into the new year, if necessary, many, many times. So there's that. Nothing too close there that anyone's been able to sense. Aaron Judge is an interesting case because he's coming here reportedly tomorrow, and the Yankees don't know why. So if I'm the Yankees, I'm not loving that. So we'll see. He's not going to be a Met, though, just to reiterate.
Yeah, I think at that point that is certainly clear after the signing of Verlander. Obviously, over the next couple of days, a lot of things are going to happen out there in San Diego. What should Met fans expect to see from the Mets over these next couple of days?
Starting pitching market, Joe. Definitely the bullpen market has to get rolling at some point. It hasn't picked up that much yet, but we haven't even talked about your Andrew Chafin's or your Adam Ottavinos. Or there's a couple relievers out like that they need to sign and pick up. They've acquired some depth on the bullpen front already this offseason, as you guys know. But there's more to do there. So they're busy. I mean, they're meeting with these agents all day and all night. So if I picked up my phone and saw a text from a source or a report from a competitor that they're close with Chafin or Ottavino, that wouldn't surprise me at all. So definitely that. On the position player side, a lot of it just relies on Nimmo. And so you asked me about the backup plan before, Joe, and I failed to answer it. They say it's Starling Marte, but we all know that Marte doesn't have a history of playing a full season. He's great when he's out there, but he gets injured. So once they get news on Nimmo, they'll have to move on a Kevin Kiermaier or a Cody Bellinger or something to cover center field. So I'm sure they'll be having some preliminary meetings on that, but they have to wait to see what Nimmo's going to do.
Andy, we know this is a week with not a lot of sleep, a lot of action. It's already begun for the Mets, so we thank you so much for your time, for joining us tonight, and good luck the rest of the way in that hotel in San Diego.
My pleasure, guys. I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
All right, looking forward to it. That was SNY insider Andy Martino, who just does an excellent job, obviously covering not just the Mets, also covering the Yankees, the league. And Joe, there you have it. Andy started this day off with a gigantic stick of dynamite with the Verlander news, something that Mets fans have been sitting on for a while and really hoping for, especially after DeGrom left on Friday. A reminder, this is the Mets Pod live winter meeting special. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. So, Joe, let's close the book here on our Verlander reaction, right? We haven't had that necessarily yet on this show. A quick appearance on Hot Stove, of course, but they lose to DeGrom Friday. A lot of doom and gloom scenario. We hear how aggressive the Dodgers could be with Verlander. Billy Epler and Steve Cohen close a deal again, the second year in a row where they go out and get the guy on the pitching market. You have to admit, it's just very, very impressive with their ability not to make an offseason plan, but to also pivot throughout that offseason.
It's been incredibly impressive. And the work that Steve Cohen and, we have to give some credit to Billy Epler here. I know he's gotten a hard time for the trade deadline, but if you look back to when he was the GM of the Angels, he convinced Shohei Ohtani to sign with the secondary Los Angeles team with the Angels. Then he comes to the Mets. He convinced Hall of Fame pitcher Max Scherzer to spurn the Dodgers to come to, they're still the secondary team in New York until they're not, to come to the Mets. And now they did it again with Justin Verlander. It's obviously money talks. That helps a lot. And I know Steve and Alex Cohen are heavily involved in these things. But I think Billy Epler deserves some credit for this because he's proving to be a bit of a deal closer.
He absolutely has. And I think if you're a Mets fan right now, before you get really excited at the idea of the next move, right? Let's talk about this team, how it looks with Justin Verlander. You obviously have Scherzer and Verlander at the top. Verlander coming off of a Cy Young season. We cannot emphasize that enough. When you look at Verlander last year, he had made 28 starts, and not to just rally on DeGrom, right? Or pile on DeGrom. DeGrom made 11 starts last year. He made 15 the year before that. We know how many of those in 2021 that he had to leave early due to injury. So as much conversation as there is around Verlander being older or Verlander coming off Tommy John a couple of years ago, if you're a Mets fan, you have to be excited about the idea of the first half of the season, hopefully not scratching and clawing and how to live without your ace 1A, Scherzer 1B, and Scherzer missed a lot of time as well. Verlander, Scherzer, Carrasco back in the mix. You and I individually are pretty excited about what Peterson or McGill can do with opportunity. We'll get there. And of course, the fact that this rotation, like Andy said, is going to sign another starting pitcher sometime this offseason.
We're certainly not naive enough to not recognize the risk that comes with heading your rotation with 38-year-old Max Scherzer and about to be 40-year-old Justin Verlander. It's a risk, and it's paying $86 million or whatever per year for them. It is a risk, but this is what the Mets want to do. They want these short-term, high AAV dollars that just increases their flexibility long-term. I don't think they really wanted to go to 5 years or probably even 4 years for Jacob deGrom. I don't think they would have wanted to go 6 years for Carlos Rodon. I think this was just a perfect marriage between Justin Verlander and the Mets, and it just gives them the opportunity to continue to build up this farm system behind them because their goal of sustainable success is win now. So it's Max Scherzer, that's Justin Verlander, and then win in the future, which is keeping a lot of those draft picks, using them on pitching, and developing that pitching using their new player development that's going to be led by Eric Yeagers, who came over from the Reds and obviously via Driveline. So they're going in a new route as far as player development goes. And this is just working towards that sustainable model that when Max and Verlander are out the door, you're hopefully having some pitching prospects knocking on the door ready to go.
It fits their model, like you said, and as much as people were intrigued by the age of a guy like Rodon and maybe having a player here for 6 years, as you've outlined, Joe, this was a route for them to stay highly competitive this year and have expectations to make a World Series, or at least have the roster to have that shot to make a World Series, and then not deal with the draft pick penalties, not compensation, penalties. I know you have said before it's your second and fifth highest picks for the Mets. That would actually be a fourth rounder, not a fifth rounder. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Joe, also international signing money, which is massive when you're trying to retool a farm system from scratch.
Yeah, it's $1 million of international bonus money. So while those penalties, whenever I mention this, I could just see people watching this right now rolling their eyes about draft picks, because we know the MLB draft doesn't get the same, attention that the NFL draft and the NBA draft get, because it's an entirely different beast. But it's important. I mean, the Dodgers are a team that for the longest time just spent and spent and spent so that way they could build up their farm system. Now it's at the point where it feels like every other day the Dodgers are calling up like a top 100 type of prospect, and the Mets want to be there. And that requires some restraint on long-term deals. That requires some restraint on pursuing guys that have qualifying offers attached to them. And some restraint in the trade market in not overpaying for certain things on the market. So it's a really tough line that Billy Epler has to toe here. It's contending while also not ignoring the long-term.
It's a good day to not be the Marlins or the Nationals in this division right now. When you look at it, the Mets made a big move to start the day with Verlander. We know how loaded the Braves are, and we'll see what their offseason brings as well. And they also brought back Charlie Morton before the offseason even began to help their pitching. And the Phillies make the other splash of the day, signing Trey Turner, somebody that I loved, somebody we talked about for this lineup. Understandably, the Mets can't go buy out the entire free agent market. This is going to happen. The Phillies had a need at shortstop. Trey Turner, it sounded like he wanted to come back to the East Coast. Joe, an 11-year, $300 million deal for the 29-year-old in Turner, who comes back to this division. And for the Phillies, this is, as much as it's 11 years, this is every bit of a win now move, because we know Turner, with his speed, is not going to be nearly the same player from 35 to 40, but a massive, massive move. And now we see kind of the chess game going on. It's a lot faster paced than that, though, between the three top dogs in the National League East.
There's kind of two ways to do it, right? Like the Mets idea is spend the real lot in short spurts and then just kind of repurpose that and build the farm around it. The Phillies have kind of taken the polar opposite approach, which is giving extra length on the end of deals in order to keep the AAV value down. They did 13 years with Bryce Harper. Now they did 11 years with Trey Turner. The reality is the NL East is going to be a very difficult division, just like it was in 2022. The Braves are going nowhere. They're still going to make moves. Hasn't happened yet. Maybe they do convince Dansby Swanson to come back, but they're going to make some moves too. The Phillies are probably not done. I know they need some starting pitching. And, as Ben Verlander said on his podcast today, where he talked to his brother, Justin, obviously the newest New York Met. And, he said that Justin was told by the Mets that, the team you're seeing now is not the team you're going to be seeing on opening day. So there is more to come with the Mets. What that is, that's going to be very interesting to follow.
It really is. I sit here and I think the one thing, and we've been very honest about this on this podcast, because you and I have done a variation of this podcast long enough to know there are the trades you could see coming. We had prayed for Francisco Lindor, and I'm not going to say we saw that coming, but when it happened, it was like, this is something we've heard about for a long time. We can't believe it happened. Then there's the trades like Chris Bassett, where you're like, oh, wow, I did not see this coming. I feel like we're looking at the latter this offseason for the Mets. Maybe Brian Reynolds, as much as we hear about Brian Reynolds, ends up being the guy if Nimmo signs elsewhere, but with the cost that it would take to get him and the Pirates' hesitancy to trade him, that seems like a long reach. But Joe, as much as we talk about all these pitchers on the free agent market, We talk about the idea of bringing Nimmo back. I know Joel Sherman has linked Benintendi to the Mets as well. It really feels like the other, oh, wow, move compared to Verlander will be on the trade market that is extremely hard to predict, as Andy outlined.
I've said it on our show over the last few weeks that it kind of feels like Starling Marte is going to end up in center field for this team. Now, after hearing Billy Epler talk and some rumors, I'm starting to kind of feel like they don't want to have Starling Marte in center field, and that's probably for the best, realistically. I think his body will hold up a little better in right than it would in center. And the interest in a guy like Benintendi is interesting, as Brandon Nimmo's market is going to be big. I mean, it's not going to shock me if that contract exceeds $150 million. I
think it's
the case,
right? The term seems to be the problem with Nimmo.
Yeah, it's going to be long-term. It's going to be big money. And I don't know if the Mets feel comfortable doing that. I do think that they're going to be prudent in evaluating what Brandon Nimmo's worth to them. And they're not going to really budge too much on that. And I think that's sound business decision. But at the same time, if he's gone, you have to figure out what you're going to do. And the Benintendi interest is very interesting because he's not really much of a center fielder. He's more of a left fielder. And Joel Sherman actually indicated in that article, which is something I brought up to Andy, maybe they do move a Mark Canha and move some of his money off the books, sign a Benintendi, and then sign a Cody Bellinger or a Kevin Kiermaier and get a real center fielder and make left field go from Mark Canha to Andrew Benintendi. I think what it ultimately comes down to is if Brandon Nimmo's gone, they're probably going to need to find some creative way to figure out this outfield in order to keep Starling Marte out of center.
Yeah, it feels like a Benintendi move would be to strictly replace Nimmo's on-base prowess, right? When you look at his ability to get on base, not only throughout his career, before he got traded to the Yankees, he was getting on base at a 387 rate, 373 for the season when you factor in his tenure with the Yankees as well. Let me ask you this, Joe. With the idea of Marte staying in the corner spot, and we'll safely say right field, does that, because he's so good defensively for a corner outfield, he's essentially a center fielder playing in that corner field spot, does that make it possible that your center fielder doesn't have to be an elite defender with crazy range because they have some protection next to them? Or do you think a player with the defense of Bellinger or Kiermaier would still be necessary in this case?
I'd still want a true center fielder because I think kind of the point of Marte being in right is to reduce the range that he has to cover to keep his body healthy. And if you get, a limited center fielder, then I think that puts a little more pressure on Marte, even though he's standing in right field, he's basically covering right center too and the line. So he's really playing, a bigger patch of land essentially. So I would be looking if you do lose Nimmo, you got to find a way to get a true center fielder in here. And a guy like Bellinger is probably looking for a 1-year prove it deal. And he can play center field. He has a good arm and he has a history of hitting for power. And one thing the Mets, you and I have talked about this, need to do is find a way to add power to this lineup. And how they're going to manage that with an offense that's largely under contractual control, it's going to take a lot of work from Billy Epler.
Yeah, there's no way around it. I think the case for Bellinger, right, goes back to the conversation that we had. If you lose Nimmo, what you're upset about is he was really good defensively in center field last year. He has made strides that was very hard for any evaluator to see coming. He wasn't himself his peak offensively, but he was a fine player that works counts at the top of the order. And everybody loves Brandon Nimmo, the clubhouse guy, the hustle, the smiling, everything with that. What we were honest about was the Mets can replace Brandon Nimmo in the leadoff spot. Jeff McNeil can be an adequate leadoff hitter. If they move Mark Canha, obviously that opportunity wouldn't be there for him. But Canha is a guy in a pinch with his on-base ability and his ability to get hit by pitches, it feels like at a rate that we've never seen, can be a leadoff guy. And then you have Marte, Lindor, Pete. So, and more power can come from Alvarez, things like that. So you're looking at, if you've got a Kiermaier, if you've got a Bellinger, they're not somebody that has to bat leadoff, has to bat second. Honestly, you're looking at them at the almost very bottom of the order more often than not, which makes it, you look at the Mets need to be different, right? That's a conversation. You can't just run it back. And they've already started that process by getting Verlander. If they brought back DeGrom, brought back Diaz, brought back Nimmo. Everybody been like, yeah, we love these guys. It's great to have them back. But why is this team going to go further? If you go get a cheaper center fielder than what Nimmo is going to cost, you can allocate resources elsewhere to improve those areas.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to need money for this secondary starting pitcher. Like,
it's not going to be cheap.
Yeah, I mean, look at what these starting pitchers are going for on the market already, and that's not talking Verlander. It feels like it's going to be a year longer than you're comfortable for probably any of these guys, whether that's a Tyone, a Kodai Senga, who's someone that you and I very much want. And, you know, I'd really, really like to see the Mets make a hard push to convince him to come here. I mean, when he declared free agency, his agent basically said his priorities were a team that's trying to win, check, a team invested in analytics, check, and a team that's in a big market, check. So, like, the Mets make all the sense in the world for Kodai Senga. And in my opinion, if the Mets analytics are good enough for Justin Verlander, who's coming from probably the most analytical organization in the sport in the Houston Astros, it should be enough for Kodai Senga. So for me, that's what I'd like to see. I know it's a bit of an unknown. There's certainly some risk associated with him, but I think they can afford to kind of shoot for the sky there.
All right, Joe, I'll close it out with this as we wrap up just night one. A reminder, whether you're watching us live, thank you. You can watch on SNY's YouTube, their digital social platforms. If you're listening on the podcast feed and missed us live, as you're listening to this, I'm assuming on Tuesday, you can catch us live on Tuesday night, Wednesday night, same time, 9 p.m. Eastern time. We will be in the Mets Pod podcast feed as well. So thank you so much. Joe, I'll close with this, though. The winter meetings are underway. Started off with a crazy big splash from the Mets. What do you expect going into days 2 and 3? It doesn't have to be Mets related, although it can be. But what are you expecting to happen the rest of the way there in San Diego?
I mean, hopefully they make some moves here in the next hour and a half before I go to sleep. I don't want to miss
an hour and a half.
Yeah,
you really make it pushing it tonight.
I might make it to 11. I'm going to try. But I think Aaron Judge signs this week. I think that's a big move. It's obviously, like Andy said, that's not the Mets deal. But I think Aaron Judge is flying out there to meet with the Yankees, the Giants, and whatever other team is a finalist. And Dodgers. I expect him to Dodgers maybe. I expect him to make a decision this week. And as far as the Mets go, I'd like to see them lock in that starting pitcher during the winter meetings, but I don't think it's a necessity. I think there's enough volume of pitching out there that it's possible this lingers beyond the meetings. I'd like to see a solid bullpen arm. Andy mentioned Andrew Chafin. He mentioned Adam Ottavino. I think the Mets need to get a jump start on adding a couple veteran arms to this bullpen. So I think it's going to be a very busy couple days here. And like you said, check us out every night here live. And then if you miss it, obviously listen in the podcast. But really excited to see how these next couple days go. And it's a fun time for baseball when just things are happening.
I'm with you all the way. I think I would be not surprised if they got that next arm, but I'm not expecting it. I think it's something where you can use the meetings to gauge what's out there on the trade market, and then you can go back to the drawing board and weigh those trade options and trade costs with the starting pitchers that you can just simply go pay for. While the relief market, Joe, we've talked about, we're not a huge fan of trading for high-profile relievers because usually the cost is significantly high, and usually you can go out and get them, not on the cheap, but for a decent price. So one relief arm coming out of San Diego would be big time, and then we'll see where the lineup goes. We will be back on tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern. If you're listening to this on Tuesday, that is this evening. Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, SNY's Twitter, SNY's Facebook and YouTube page, and SNY's Steve Gelbs will be joining us as well on Tuesday night. So Andy joined us night one. Andy will be back for the final show on Wednesday night, but we have Gelbs for the Tuesday night show, who is also at the MLB Winter Meetings. Make sure you tune into all the content from SNY there covering the winter meetings. And a reminder, of course, to subscribe to the Mets Pod. You will never miss a show. You don't have to be reminded to get these shows in your feed. If you're subscribed, it will auto-download for you. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. Thanks so much, everybody. We will see you tomorrow.